Welcome back to Cozy Side Audio. Tonight's story is soft, slow, and written from the heart. Perfect for those quiet hours. If it touches you, please like, share it with someone special, and subscribe for more gentle moments. Let's begin the story. Cozy Side Audio presents In the Words We Write, Chapter 1, First Byline War. Casey Hart had known, from the second she walked into the newsroom that Monday morning, that Josh Wilder had already been there. The evidence sat on the bulletin board in bright red pushpins. His headline: Campus dining contractor fails health inspection. Front page placement, above the fold. Smirking at her from 24-point bold, as if Josh himself had plastered his grin over the newsprint. She stopped in the doorway, gripping her travel mug so tightly the lid squeaked. The rest of the staff was already buzzing. Copy editors hunched over laptops, layout team fiddling with InDesign, photographers loading files onto the server. The air smelled like coffee and toner, humming with the low panic of an approaching deadline. But all Casey could see was that headline, her space stolen. Her piece had been better. Cleaner sourcing, tighter language, and an angle that would have given the paper weight instead of cheap outrage clicks. She'd spent 2 weeks building her feature on tuition hikes, tracking data, chasing administrators, even pulling midnight interviews with students balancing jobs and classes. It was meticulous. It was solid. It deserved the front page. Instead, Josh had slapped down a scandal about cockroaches in the cafeteria and somehow leapfrogged her. "Morning, Hart?" came his voice from behind her, smooth and infuriatingly casual. Casey turned. There he was, Josh Wilder, leaning against the doorframe with that infuriating posture of someone who'd never in his life lost a fight worth remembering. His shirt was rumpled, tie half undone like he'd thrown it on as an afterthought. He had a pencil tucked behind his ear and ink smudged across his wrist, the picture of disheveled genius, or at least that was how he wanted people to see him. "Enjoying the view?" he asked, nodding toward the board. "You buried the lead," Casey snapped, heat rising to her cheeks. It should have been about negligence at the inspection office, not about cockroaches and people's food. Josh grinned, sharp and infuriating. Come on, Hart. Nobody's going to read institutional oversight fails to enforce standards. They will read cockroach in your pizza. It's sensationalist garbage. It's memorable, he countered, brushing past her toward the coffee pot. Front page memorable. Casey clenched her jaw so tightly it ached. He wasn't wrong, not exactly, but the fact that he'd chosen the cheap, click-chasing route made her blood boil. Journalism was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to hold power accountable, shine a light on issues that mattered. Not just scare students into skipping lunch. But Josh didn't care about that. Josh cared about winning. And apparently, he'd won this round. She dropped her bag onto her desk, forcing herself to breathe through her nose, to channel her anger into something productive. Fine, she thought. If he wants a war, I'll give him one. By noon, the newsroom had dissolved into its usual rhythm. Reporters banging at keyboards, editors barking over deadlines, the constant thrum of printers spitting proofs. Casey hunched over her laptop, shaping her next feature with surgical precision. She could hear Josh a few desks away, joking with the sports editor, laughter spilling into the air like smoke. It grated on her nerves. When he laughed like that, loud, unrestrained, like the world itself had told him something funny, everyone else joined in. He had that charm, the kind that made people forgive his recklessness, the kind that made the faculty advisor shrug when Josh's sources were shaky or his copy was late. But Casey saw through it. She always had. At 3 o'clock sharp, the staff meeting began. The team crowded around the long conference table, laptops open, caffeine fueling their half attention. Professor McBride, their weary but sharp-eyed faculty advisor, leaned against the wall with his clipboard. "Let's start with next week's lineup," said Maya, the managing editor. "Casey, you're up." Casey straightened, sliding her outline across the table. "I'm pitching a follow-up on tuition hikes. I've got data comparisons from the last 10 years, plus interviews with students juggling 3 jobs. It's grounded, it's necessary, and it sounds boring." Josh cut in, not even looking up from his notebook. Her pulse spiked. "Excuse me?" Josh finally glanced at her, a lazy half smile tugging at his lips. Don't get me wrong, Hart. I love your graphs. But no one reads a spreadsheet and feels something. You need human stakes. There are human stakes, she shot back. Students are drowning in debt. That's not compelling enough for you? He tilted his head, tapping his pencil against the page. Not compared to a cafeteria full of cockroaches. The room chuckled. Casey's face burned. That's enough, McBride interrupted, his voice even but sharp. Both of you. Journalism isn't a competition. But it was. Everyone knew it. The editor-in-chief role was open next semester, and both Casey and Josh were gunning for it. Every pitch, every headline, every word was ammunition. Casey folded her hands tightly in her lap, nails digging crescents into her skin. She'd win this war. She had to. That evening, long after the rest of the staff had drifted out, Casey was still at her desk. The newsroom was quiet now, shadows stretching long over the cluttered tables, the hum of the printer finally silent. She liked it best like this. Just her. The glow of her laptop, the sound of her own thoughts sharpened into sentences. But then came the scrape of a chair across the floor. Josh. Of course. He dropped into the seat across from her, slinging his bag down with a thud. You know, he said, if you spent half as much time learning to bend the rules as you do writing them down, you might actually be fun. Casey's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Green, sharp, annoyingly alive. And if you spent half as much time verifying your facts as you do chasing clicks, she said coolly, you might actually be credible. For a second, he grinned like he always did. But then, just for a second, the smile flickered. The silence stretched, taut and electric. Then he leaned back, lacing his hands behind his head. Guess we'll see whose name is at the top of the masthead next year. Casey shut her laptop, pulse pounding. Guess we will. Chapter 2, Sabotage Season. Casey arrived at the newsroom Tuesday morning armed with two things: her meticulously highlighted notes for the tuition piece, and the kind of brittle determination that could cut glass. She'd been awake until 3 a.m. polishing her draft. Every sentence gleamed. Every source was airtight. If the world was fair, this article would slam down onto the front page and cement her reputation as the paper's spine. But the world was not fair. The world had Josh Wilder in it. He was already at his desk when she walked in, balancing on the back two legs of his chair while tossing a stress ball in the air. His laptop screen glowed with something he clearly wasn't supposed to be doing. Fantasy football, maybe. When he noticed her, he didn't bother hiding it. Morning, Hart, he said, catching the ball one-handed. Looking very caffeinated. Casey set her travel mug down with a thud. Some of us actually work. Work? He spun his chair back to his desk, typing rapidly. You mean like rewriting the same tuition story for the 7th time? It's called follow-up reporting, she said through her teeth. Accountability, a word you might want to look up. He didn't answer. Instead, he slid a manila folder across his desk in her direction. It was thick, stuffed with printed drafts. She frowned. What's that? Just thought you might like to see the piece I'm working on. His grin was shark-like. An exposé on a professor who's been recycling the same exam questions for 5 years. My source gave me screenshots. Students are selling answer keys. Casey blinked. It was petty, small, a little ridiculous, but undeniably juicy. You can't publish that, she said. It'll tank students' grades, and what if your source is lying? Josh shrugged, already clicking through images on his screen. Then I'll verify, but when it lands, it'll get traction. Way more than another bar graph about tuition. The stress in her chest sharpened to a blade. He was doing it again, going for shock value over substance. And worse, he'd probably get away with it. Casey turned back to her own desk, jaw tight, but the faint rustle of his papers kept tugging at her focus. He wanted her to be distracted. He liked getting under her skin. Fine. 2 could play at sabotage. The chance came that afternoon. She was in the photo lab pulling reference images when she noticed a printout left on the counter. Josh's half-finished draft. Headline in bold, his voice dripping with smugness across the page. And there, taped to the side of the file cabinet, was a perfectly innocent photograph. A squirrel sitting on the quad, mid-chew, cheeks puffed like it had just discovered the meaning of life. Casey's lips curved into something dangerously close to a smile. 5 minutes later, Josh's article file contained not the incriminating photo of the professor's recycled exam, but a high-resolution shot of the squirrel, cropped dramatically like it was about to break the story of the century. She left the draft exactly where she found it. The fallout came in the next day's layout meeting. "Josh," Maya said, holding up a mock front page, "why is there a squirrel in your article about academic dishonesty?" Josh choked on his coffee. "What?" Everyone around the table leaned forward. The proof spread across the table clearly showed his headline. Prof recycles exams, students sell answers, and beneath it, the solemn squirrel. Casey bit the inside of her cheek so hard it almost bled. That's not my photo," Josh stammered. No, that's definitely not." Laughter broke across the table. The sports editor was wheezing. Even McBride allowed himself the faintest of sighs that might have been amusement. Casey busied herself with her notes, her expression perfectly neutral. Josh's eyes darted across the room, landing on her. For a split second, he looked like he knew, but she just raised her eyebrows sweetly and took a sip of coffee. War, after all, required strategy. Josh struck back 2 days later. Casey opened her draft to find her article on tuition hikes had mysteriously been retitled. Students bankrupt, but at least they get free pizza. Her jaw locked. Scrolling further, she discovered more edits. Every student quote rewritten to include complaints about cafeteria cheese. A graph redrawn in Comic Sans. Her closing paragraph replaced with, "Maybe college is expensive because students won't stop buying overpriced lattes." Just a thought. Casey slammed her laptop shut, earning a glance from the copy desk. Josh sat across the room, chin propped on his fist, watching her with open amusement. She mouthed, "You're dead." He mouthed back, "Bring it." The next week blurred into an escalating game of one-upmanship. Casey swapped his carefully sourced stats with numbers pulled from a Monopoly rulebook. Josh intercepted her interview request with the dean and sent a parody questionnaire instead, asking if the dean preferred vanilla or existential despair as his favorite ice cream flavor. Casey accidentally redirected Josh's email attachments, so his article draft printed entirely in wingdings. By Friday, the newsroom was split down the middle. Some staffers rooted for Casey, admiring her precision and quiet ruthlessness. Others backed Josh, reveling in his chaos and jokes. The rivalry had stopped being background noise. It was now the newsroom's favorite sport. Late Friday night, Casey lingered again, scrolling through her notes while the office emptied out. She liked the silence, the click of her keys, the clarity. But she wasn't alone. Josh dropped into the chair beside her with an exaggerated sigh. "You know, Hart, this has been fun. But you realize eventually someone's going to notice we've turned the newsroom into a Cold War, right?" She didn't look at him. "Maybe if you respected actual journalism. Maybe if you weren't so uptight." They stopped, words colliding in the air. For a long second, they stared at each other, the fluorescent light humming overhead. Casey's heart thudded in her chest, unexpected and irritating. She wanted to tell him off, to shove him out the door, but instead she found herself wondering, annoyingly, what he'd look like if he ever took anything seriously. Josh leaned back, smirking again, breaking the moment. "See you Monday, Hart. Try not to dream about me." Casey exhaled slowly as he left. War, she thought. This is just war. But her pulse said otherwise. Chapter 3. Public Clash. By the third week of the semester, the newsroom felt less like a newspaper and more like a boxing ring. Everyone had picked a side, whether they admitted it or not. There was Team Casey, made up of the copy editors and the features writers, people who appreciated structure, deadlines, and the sanctity of the AP stylebook. And there was Team Josh, A ragtag coalition of photographers, sports writers, and anyone who thought journalism should be entertaining first, accurate second. Casey didn't care about sides. She cared about winning. She slid her printed draft across the long conference table, neat and stapled, while Josh flopped his own work down in a messy pile beside hers. She didn't even have to look to know his draft would be half-formatted, riddled with sarcastic asides in the margins, and, God help her, probably lacking a headline. The staff meeting began as usual, with Maya trying to keep the circus in line. Okay, people, we're over budget on column inches, so we need to decide what makes the cut this week. Casey straightened, waiting. Her tuition piece was airtight. It had to make the cut. Casey, Maya said, walk us through your draft. Casey launched into her pitch, polished and confident. The piece expands on last week's coverage, but this time I've sourced data from the State Education Board and tracked the comparative increases against inflation. The numbers show a 32% rise over the past decade. I've also included first-hand accounts from students taking out additional jobs to make rent. It's hard data paired with human impact. She laid out her sources. She explained her graphs. She made the case like she was arguing in court. When she finished, silence lingered in the room, thick and expectant. Then, Josh leaned forward, twirling his pencil. That's great, Hart. Really, nothing says must-read journalism like 32%. Casey bristled. Numbers matter. They prove the scale of the problem. Sure, Josh said, lounging back in his chair. But let's be honest. Half the campus won't even get past your first chart. We need something that grabs them by the throat. Maya pinched the bridge of her nose. Josh, what are you proposing? Josh slapped his own draft onto the table. I'm proposing this, a profile of a fraternity hazing incident that went way too far. I've got a source who swears there's a video. The room rippled with whispers. Casey narrowed her eyes. That's unverified. You don't even have the video. Yet, Josh corrected, flashing his grin. But I'll get it. And when I do, it'll make people read. It'll make people talk. Isn't that the point? No, Casey shot back. The point is to tell the truth, not whatever half-baked story will get you clicks. Josh leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes glinting. Funny, because my half-baked stories keep landing on the front page. Where's your carefully baked one, Hart? Oh, right, buried on page 3. The words hit like a slap. Around the table, staffers shifted, some grinning, some wincing. Casey's pulse roared in her ears. At least my stories don't risk getting us sued for libel. Better sued than ignored. The argument spiraled. Data versus drama, ethics versus excitement, credibility versus charisma. The table became a chorus of muttered opinions, the room dividing into factions with every exchange. Finally, McBride spoke from the corner, his calm voice slicing through the noise. Enough. The room froze. Journalism, he said evenly, is not a popularity contest. It is not about who shouts the loudest or who charms the most readers. It is about truth. Both of you are capable of it, but right now you're dragging this paper into a pissing contest. Silence stretched sharp as glass. Casey felt the heat in her face, but forced herself not to look down, not to flinch. Josh, of course, leaned back in his chair with infuriating nonchalance, like he'd just been told off in class and found it funny. McBride sighed. We'll run both pieces, Casey's data feature, Josh's hazing profile, if he can secure hard evidence. If not, it dies. Understood? Casey nodded stiffly. Josh gave a mock salute. The meeting moved on, but the damage lingered. The lines had been drawn deeper than ever. This wasn't just rivalry now. It was open warfare, sanctioned by the paper itself. Later, as the room emptied, Casey packed her notes with meticulous care, willing her hands not to shake. Josh strolled past, stopping just long enough to murmur, You know, Hart, if passion were points, you'd already be editor-in-chief. Too bad it takes more than homework to win. She didn't answer. She just watched him leave, pulse thundering, resolve hardening. If he wanted war, he was going to get it. And this time, she wasn't holding back. Chapter 4. Crossing Lines. By Wednesday night, the newsroom felt like a pressure cooker. Midterms were approaching, deadlines stacked high, and Casey could practically feel Josh breathing down her neck, even when he wasn't in the room. Her tuition piece had finally been accepted for page 2, but that wasn't enough. Not when Josh was strutting around like his hazing exposé was destined for the Pulitzer. He hadn't produced the promised video yet, but somehow his smug grin suggested he would. And Casey couldn't stand it. So when she heard from a friend in student government about an emergency budget meeting, closed doors, hushed voices, she knew this was her chance. A scoop big enough to eclipse Josh's theatrics. The meeting was at 9 p.m., tucked in some fluorescent-lit basement classroom. No press was allowed, obviously, but Casey had perfected the art of quiet persistence. She slipped in behind a janitor, notebook tucked under her sweater, and found a spot near the back row. What she heard made her pulse spike. Administrators discussing a proposed cut to financial aid programs. Not just a cut, an overhaul. If it went through, hundreds of students would lose their scholarships. Casey's pen flew across the page. This was it. Proof that her kind of reporting mattered. But just as she scribbled a damning quote, the door creaked open. Josh. He leaned against the frame, casual as ever, as if crashing a confidential budget meeting was his birthright. His eyes swept the room until they landed on her. He raised his eyebrows in a silent, "Really?" Casey froze, her stomach knotting. Of course he'd show up. Josh sauntered in, pulling a campus ID lanyard from his pocket and flashing it like a backstage pass. He didn't even have clearance, but his confidence carried him past the threshold. A few administrators frowned, but no one stopped him. Casey's pulse climbed into her throat. If they both got caught, it could tank their positions at the paper. She hissed when he slid into the empty chair beside her. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Same as you," he whispered back, looking for a story worth printing. "You'll blow our cover." He grinned. "Relax, Hart, I'm blending in." "You're wearing a hoodie that says, 'Kiss the Press.'" Josh just winked and flipped open his notebook. For the next hour, Casey tried to focus on the meeting, but his presence threw her rhythm off. He tapped his pencil incessantly. He leaned too close when scribbling notes, his arm brushing hers. And worst of all, when one of the administrators mentioned a figure so outrageous it made Casey's jaw drop, she caught Josh grinning at her reaction like they'd just shared a private joke. She hated that it made her heart skip. The meeting finally adjourned close to midnight. Casey bolted, notebook clutched tight, but Josh trailed after her down the hallway. "That was good," he said, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Messy, big, definitely front page worthy." "Don't even think about stealing it," she snapped. He laughed. "Relax, I've got my own angle, but admit it, you like the rush." "I like the facts." "Sure, but you also like sneaking into places you're not supposed to be. Don't deny it, Hart. I saw your face." She opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came out. He wasn't wrong, and that infuriated her even more. Instead, she shoved past him toward the exit. "Try not to ruin this one, Wilder." He called after her, voice echoing down the stairwell. "Only if you try not to make it boring." The next day, the war escalated again. Casey arrived to find that Josh's hazing piece had ballooned. He'd managed to track down a grainy clip of students staggering blindfolded across a field. It wasn't damning enough for formal charges, but it was visual gold. At the same time, her financial aid story had teeth. She'd confirmed the quotes, secured student reactions, and even got a reluctant statement from a faculty member. Both articles were strong. Both could land on the front page. But instead of professional rivalry, things got ugly. Josh accidentally borrowed her external hard drive and returned it with half her photo files mysteriously missing. Casey retaliated by swapping his working headline, "Frat Games Crossed the Line," with her own draft of future lawsuit in progress. The newsroom buzzed with their antics. Some staffers laughed, others groaned, but everyone watched. Finally, Maya slammed her laptop shut in frustration. "Enough, you two are turning this place into a circus. If you want to ruin each other's careers, fine. But don't take the paper down with you." Casey bit back a reply, cheeks hot. Josh sat across the table, unbothered as ever, tapping his pencil like a victory drum. But later, alone at her desk, Casey couldn't shake the echo of his words in the hallway. "You like the rush." Maybe she did. And maybe that scared her more than losing the byline. Chapter 5. Personal Jabs. By the next week, the newsroom had become unbearable. It wasn't just Casey and Josh trading quiet sabotage anymore. Everyone had an opinion. Every time she walked into the room, she felt the split. Half the staff looking to her like she was the last bastion of journalistic integrity. The other half smirking, waiting for Josh to drop another outrageous punchline. It didn't help that the faculty advisor, McBride, seemed perpetually exhausted by both of them. "You're supposed to be the two strongest candidates for editor-in-chief," he muttered at one point. "Right now, you're just children with keyboards." Children with keyboards. Casey had gone home that night and stared at the ceiling, furious at him, furious at Josh, furious at herself for caring so much. But the anger had a sharp edge, and sharp edges demanded somewhere to cut. Tuesday's meeting turned into blood sport. Maya was trying to keep order, but Casey could feel Josh needling her across the table. He leaned back, tossing a pen into the air, waiting for his moment. When she presented her follow-up, an interview with 3 students whose financial aid was in jeopardy, he pounced. "So let me get this straight," Josh said, stretching out his words. "You found 3 students to complain about being broke. Stop the presses." Casey's face went hot. "Their experiences represent hundreds of others." "Or maybe you cherry-pick the most dramatic sob stories to pad your case." Real balanced heart. Her pulse pounded. "At least I don't fabricate half my quotes because I'm too lazy to fact-check." The room gasped, half horrified, half thrilled. Josh sat forward now, grin sharp. "Big words from someone whose idea of a night out is color-coding her flashcards," he shot back. The laughter that followed felt like a slap. Casey forced her jaw shut, staring at the table. It was childish, cruel, but what stung most was the flicker of recognition in the laughter. Because yes, she was meticulous, organized, relentless. She knew how people saw her. And for some reason, it mattered too much that Josh had said it out loud. After the meeting, she slammed her laptop closed harder than she meant to. Josh lingered, of course. He always lingered. "You know I didn't mean," he started. "Yes, you did." He blinked at her sharpness. She gathered her notes with crisp precision, refusing to look up. "You think being the class clown makes you untouchable," she said, her voice low but steady. "But when people stop laughing, what's left?" "Nothing. No one can trust you." Josh didn't grin this time. He just watched her, still as a photograph. For a moment, she thought she'd actually hurt him, but then he leaned back, crossing his arms. Better nothing than someone so wound up they can't breathe unless it's underlined in their planner. Casey flinched despite herself. That night, she went home and opened her planner anyway, staring at the neat rows of boxes, the scribbled deadlines, the fluorescent highlighter lines. It was supposed to make her feel steady, in control. Instead, her chest ached. The paper went to print that Friday, carrying both their articles side by side. Casey's aid piece was solid, careful, undeniable. Josh's hazing profile had the video, grainy but real. And guess which one everyone was talking about on campus? By Monday, she overheard students in the dining hall whispering, "Did you see Wilder's article? Crazy, right?" Wilder's article, not Hart's. Casey sat with her tray, pretending not to hear, stabbing at limp lettuce leaves. Across the room, Josh was holding court at a table with photographers, grinning like he hadn't just ripped the air out of her lungs. When his eyes flicked across the cafeteria and landed on her, he didn't smirk. He didn't taunt. He just looked at her, steady, unreadable, before turning back to his crowd. Casey shoved her fork down and walked out, her chest tight. That night, she stayed late at the newsroom again, the glow of her laptop painting her face pale in the dark. She wasn't sure why she was still there. Maybe because she didn't want to go home and think about the sound of her own name being ignored. When Josh finally walked in, hours later, he didn't joke. He dropped his bag by his desk and sat down heavily. For once, the charm was gone. "You really think I can't be trusted?" he asked, his voice quiet. Casey froze. She wanted to lie. She wanted to snap, to cut. But instead she said, "I think you don't care enough to earn it." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, almost too softly, he said, "Maybe I care too much, Hart. Just not about the same things you do." The silence that followed was unbearable. So she broke it the only way she knew how. She snapped her laptop shut, grabbed her bag, and left him sitting there, the glow of the monitors painting his face unreadable. Chapter 6. Scandal breaks. The email went out on a Thursday morning, subject line blunt and chilling. Urgent, mandatory staff meeting 5 p.m. No explanation, no context, just the timestamp and McBride's signature. By the time Casey arrived, the newsroom was already crowded, every chair filled and every corner buzzing with speculation. Something about the faculty budget? Another tuition hike? A lawsuit over Josh's hazing piece? She slid into a seat, her notebook ready, pulse ticking in her throat. Josh was across the table, leaning back with that infuriating ease. But even he wasn't smirking tonight. His pen tapped a restless rhythm against the margin of his notebook. McBride walked in, face grimmer than Casey had ever seen. He didn't bother with small talk. "There is no easy way to say this," he began, voice flat. "The administration is threatening to revoke the paper's funding." The room erupted. "What? They can't do that." "On what grounds?" McBride raised a hand. The noise died, but the tension only thickened. "They claim repeated violations of journalistic ethics, sensationalism, bias, lack of editorial oversight." He glanced around the table, his gaze flicking, just briefly, between Casey and Josh. Casey felt her stomach twist. She knew exactly what this was. The cockroach story, the hazing video, their constant feuding. Every public clash had painted the paper as a circus. "Unless we demonstrate responsible reporting," McBride went on, "the university will shut us down by the end of the semester." The words hung heavy in the air. Shut us down? Casey's heart clenched. The newspaper wasn't just ink and paper to her. It was purpose. It was proof she could shape the world line by line. Without it, who was she? Beside her, Josh finally spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "So what do we do?" McBride's eyes were tired but sharp. "We do real journalism. We find a story that matters. More than cafeteria cockroaches, more than fraternity games. And we do it right. No games, no shortcuts." Casey's pulse kicked. This was her chance. Her moment. But then McBride delivered the blow. "And I've decided who will lead it," he said. "Casey and Josh, together." The room collectively sucked in a breath. Casey's throat closed. "Excuse me?" Josh straightened. "Wait, together?" "Yes," McBride folded his arms. "You're the two strongest writers we have. You're also the ones most responsible for this mess. If you want to prove the paper deserves to exist, you'll do it side by side." Casey felt her face flush hot, her pulse hammering in her ears. "With all due respect, Professor, he and I—" "Will figure it out," McBride cut in. "Or we all lose this paper." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Josh leaned back slowly, a humorless smile tugging at his lips. "Guess that settles it, Hart. We're a team." Casey stared at him, her chest tight with fury and something else she didn't dare name. A team. The word tasted like ash. They were dismissed soon after, but Casey lingered at her desk, flipping her pen in restless circles. Across the room, Josh gathered his things, unusually quiet. Finally, he said, "You know, Hart, if we screw this up, we're not just taking each other down. We're taking everyone down." "I know." His eyes met hers. For once, no smirk, no joke, just the heavy weight of truth between them. And that, somehow, was worse. The story came to them that night. A tip landed in the paper's anonymous inbox. A whistleblower claiming the university had been covering up misallocated funds for years. Money earmarked for scholarships quietly funneled into construction projects and administrative salaries. Casey read the email twice, pulse racing. This was it. This was the story that could save them. When she looked up, Josh was standing over her shoulder, scanning the same words. His jaw tightened. "Well," he said, "looks like we've got our headline." Casey exhaled, notebook already open. "We'd better not screw it up." Josh gave a low laugh, but there was no humor in it. "For once, Hart, we actually agree." Chapter 7. Forced Alliance. The newsroom smelled of stale coffee and printer ink, the kind of air that made your clothes feel heavy. Casey sat at the long table with her laptop open, notes spread in neat stacks. She had already highlighted key leads from the whistleblower's email, outlined possible interview subjects, and sketched a tentative timeline. Across from her, Josh leaned back in his chair, balancing precariously on two legs, flipping a pen between his fingers. He hadn't opened his laptop yet. Casey's patience wore thin. "You're not even going to take notes?" Josh grinned, lazy but sharp. "Why? You've already done the homework, Hart. I'll just improvise." Improvise? She nearly choked on the word. "We're talking about potential financial fraud by the administration. Improvisation is not a strategy." "It's how you get people to talk," Josh countered, rocking his chair forward again. "You show up, you ask the right questions, you read the room. Not everything fits into your perfect little bullet points." Casey clenched her jaw. She wanted to argue, but the truth was, he wasn't wrong. Josh had a way of getting people to loosen their tongues. Too reckless, too messy, but effective. Still, she wasn't about to admit it. "Fine," she snapped. "You handle the charm. I'll handle the facts." Josh's grin widened. "So basically, I'm the good cop. You're the terrifyingly efficient cop?" She didn't dignify that with a response. Their first lead was a financial aid officer, a mid-level staffer rumored to have quietly resigned 2 semesters ago. Casey found her name in old meeting minutes and tracked her down through LinkedIn. They met her at a quiet cafe just off campus. Casey came prepared. Printed documents, highlighted notes, a list of carefully worded questions. Josh showed up late, of course, but somehow slid into the booth with a smile that immediately disarmed the woman. "Sorry I'm late," he said, voice warm, leaning in just enough to look conspiratorial. "Parking here is a nightmare, right?" The officer chuckled nervously, fiddling with her coffee cup. By the time Casey opened her mouth, Josh had already gotten her talking. About her frustrations with the administration, the long hours, the decisions she wasn't allowed to question. Casey tried to redirect with specifics, but Josh kept steering the conversation off script. It made her want to scream. And yet, when the woman finally admitted she'd seen funds mysteriously redirected, it was because Josh had gotten her to relax, to ramble, to trust. Casey scribbled furiously, her notes precise and orderly, but when she glanced up, she caught Josh watching her. Not smug, not mocking, just quietly taking in how fast her pen moved across the page. Back in the newsroom, they went at each other again. "You can't just wing it like that," Casey hissed, tapping her notes. "You got her comfortable, yes, but half of what she said was legally useless without verification. It could have been gossip." Josh leaned on the edge of her desk, unbothered. "Gossip is where the truth starts, Hart. You're so focused on the final puzzle that you forget you need to dump the box of pieces on the floor first." She glared. "At least I don't lose the box entirely." For a moment, the air between them was sharp with heat. Anger, frustration, something else flickering underneath. Then Josh leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Admit it. We make a decent team." Casey's stomach twisted. She hated how close he was, how much his grin tugged at her. She hated even more that part of her wanted to agree. Instead, she pushed her chair back, creating distance. "We make a functional team. There's a difference." Josh laughed, but it was softer this time. Almost pleased. The next week blurred into late nights and long interviews. They tracked down student workers who'd processed invoices, professors who'd raised questions about budget cuts, even a janitor who remembered being told to throw out unnecessary paperwork. Casey thrived on the structure, organizing notes, connecting dots, building the spine of a story. Josh thrived on chaos, wandering into conversations she would never have attempted, coaxing out anecdotes she hadn't thought to ask for. And somehow, against all odds, the pieces started to form a picture. By Friday night, they were the last two in the newsroom again. Pizza boxes littered the table, half-drunk coffees forming a sad army of cardboard cups. Casey leaned back, rubbing her eyes. We're actually onto something. Josh, sprawled across the opposite chair, gave her a tired but genuine smile. Told you. Best dysfunctional duo on campus. She rolled her eyes, but didn't argue this time. For a long moment, the silence between them wasn't combative. It was companionable. And that was terrifying in its own right. Chapter 8. Sparks in the silence. The newsroom was half dark, the hum of the old fluorescent lights fading with each bulb that flickered out. Midnight had long come and gone, but Casey and Josh were still hunched over the cluttered table. Pizza crusts, crumpled Post-its, half-empty coffees like soldiers that had fought and lost. Casey's laptop cast a glow across her face as she typed, her fingers flying. She was pulling together timelines from their notes, connecting staff departures with budget reallocations. Every new date lined up like pins on a board. Josh sat opposite her, legs stretched long under the table, head tipped back against the chair. He was tossing a stress ball into the air, catching it lazily like he had all the time in the world. The contrast made Casey grit her teeth. Do you ever take anything seriously? Josh cracked one eye open. I'm here past midnight eating cold pizza and breathing in ink fumes, aren't I? That's pretty serious. You're not working, she shot back. He gestured to the notes in front of him, messy scrawls, but evidence he had in fact been at it earlier. I did my part. Got the bursar's assistant to admit off record that she's been told not to question invoices. That's your smoking gun, Hart. Casey paused. She hated to admit it, but that was good. Really good. You should have recorded it, she muttered half to herself. I couldn't. She was terrified enough just whispering it, but she trusts me. There was something in his tone, not smugness, not pride, but quiet conviction. Casey found herself studying him, the way shadows played against his jaw, the weariness tucked behind his usual charm. She looked away quickly, back to her laptop. Fine. One useful contribution. Josh smirked, but it was gentler than usual. Careful, Hart. That almost sounded like a compliment. By 2 a.m., their energy was fraying. Casey slumped sideways in her chair, stretching her stiff arms. Josh had abandoned his stress ball and was leaning over her laptop screen, close enough she could smell the faint trace of his cologne mixed with stale coffee. You're organizing the timelines wrong, he said. Casey bristled. Excuse me? He reached past her, fingers brushing the edge of her keyboard, rearranging sticky notes on her desk. Look, you're lining it up by semester. You should line it up by fiscal quarter. That's how the administration thinks. You'll see the gaps more clearly. She blinked. She hadn't thought of that. Her voice caught, then steadied. That's actually smart. Josh's grin widened, but instead of teasing, he simply said, See? You're rubbing off on me. Casey froze. The words hung heavy, electric. She became suddenly, acutely aware of how close he was. The warmth of him, the way his eyes lingered on hers just a second too long. Her chest tightened. She pushed her chair back abruptly, breaking the moment. We should double-check the staff testimonies before we build the draft. Josh leaned back, letting her retreat, but his smirk had a softness to it. Sure. Whatever you say, boss. 2 days later, they hit their first real wall. The whistleblower who'd emailed them, anonymous, cryptic, finally responded to Casey's carefully worded follow-up. But instead of answers, the reply was a threat. Stop digging. You don't know what you're messing with. Casey's stomach dropped when she read it. Josh whistled low. Well, that's not ominous at all. Her pulse hammered. This means it's bigger than we thought. Someone doesn't want this coming out. Josh leaned closer, scanning the screen. Or it means we're pissing off the wrong people. You sure you want to keep going? Casey looked up at him, fierce. Of course I do. For a moment, Josh just studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. Not cocky, not mocking, but almost proud. None. Good. Because so do I. That night, as they packed up to leave, Casey caught a reflection in the darkened newsroom window. Hair messy, shirt wrinkled, exhaustion written all over her face. And yet, she felt more alive than she had in months. She glanced at Josh, slinging his bag over his shoulder, flashing her a tired grin. The rivalry was still there, sharp as ever, but underneath, something new had taken root. Something far more dangerous. Chapter 9. Lines blurred. The whistleblower's threat haunted Casey. She read it again and again, the words burned into her mind. Stop digging. It wasn't a warning. It was a dare. Josh, of course, treated it like a badge of honor. Means we're onto something, he said the next morning, tossing the printed email onto the table like it was nothing. Nobody sends that unless they're scared. Or unless they're powerful, Casey countered, her voice sharp. You don't threaten someone unless you know you can follow through. Josh leaned back, arms crossed, and gave her that maddening grin. You're nervous. Casey stiffened. I'm realistic. You say tomato, I say adrenaline rush. She wanted to snap at him, but his eyes sparkled in that reckless way of his. And damn it, part of her felt it too. A thrill, buzzing under her skin. Their next lead came in the form of a custodian who'd been at the university for 20 years. Casey arranged the meeting in the cramped staff break room, her questions written neatly in her notebook. But when the man glanced nervously at the door and muttered, "They told us not to ask questions," it was Josh who leaned forward, lowering his voice. They? Who's they? The man wouldn't say. Not then. But he scribbled a number on the back of a receipt and slipped it to Josh when they shook hands goodbye. Later, Casey cornered him outside. Why you? Why not me? Josh pocketed the paper, smirking. Guess I've got a trustworthy face. Casey huffed, but the truth was, he did, and she hated how much that stung. By the time Friday rolled around, the newsroom felt like a second home, and a war zone. They were running on too little sleep, too much caffeine, and the constant push-pull of clashing styles. Casey caught Josh rewriting one of her draft paragraphs, changing her precise phrasing into something sharper, flashier. She nearly exploded. You can't just butcher my work. It's not butchering, it's tightening, Josh shot back. Nobody reads a sentence with 3 commas in it. They do and it's accurate, Casey snapped. The argument spiraled, voices rising, their words overlapping until they weren't even sure what they were fighting about anymore. Finally, Josh slammed his pen down. God, you're impossible. And you're reckless, Casey fired back. You don't care about the rules or facts or... She stopped. Too close. Too much heat. They were standing inches apart, both of them breathing hard. Josh's eyes locked on hers. His voice dropped. Say what you're really thinking. Casey's throat went dry. She could feel it. The pull, magnetic, dangerous. Every rational part of her screamed to step back. But she didn't. Her voice came out quieter, rougher. You infuriate me. Josh's mouth twitched, like he was fighting a smile. Funny, you do the same to me. The silence stretched, charged. She could feel the warmth of him, the heat in his stare. If she leaned forward just an inch, she tore herself back, grabbing her laptop like a shield. We should get back to work. Josh exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. For once, he didn't argue. That night, Casey lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The way his eyes had softened, just for a second. The way her heart had lurched like she was stepping off a ledge. This wasn't just rivalry anymore, and that terrified her more than any anonymous threat ever could. Chapter 10. Pushback. The email came at dawn. Casey blinked blearily at her inbox, still nursing her first coffee of the day. Her heart skipped as she read the subject line. Cease and desist. She scrolled through the dense legal jargon. Claims of defamation, accusations of spreading false information, demands that the Chronicle halt publication of any ongoing investigation into financial matters of the university administration. Her stomach churned. Josh stumbled into the newsroom minutes later, hair messy, bag slung over one shoulder. She shoved the laptop at him without a word. He read, then whistled. Well, they're scared. Casey gaped at him. They're threatening to sue us. Which means, he said, tossing his bag onto the table, we've hit a nerve. Josh, this isn't a game. A lawsuit could kill the paper. He leaned closer, dropping his voice. Or it could prove we're right. If they're sending us this, it means we've got something worth burying. Casey's pulse quickened, caught between panic and adrenaline. His certainty made her want to believe him. By afternoon, the newsroom buzzed with whispers. Other staffers eyed Casey and Josh warily, half impressed, half terrified. Some muttered about backing off. Casey called an emergency meeting. She stood at the head of the conference table, notes clutched tight, Josh lounging beside her like he owned the room. They want us scared, she told the staff. They want us silent. But if we step back now, we're letting them win. This paper exists to hold people accountable. That's what journalism is. She expected Josh to crack a joke, to undercut her. Instead, he spoke up, voice steady. She's right. We've come too far to fold. If anyone wants to bow out, no shame. But I'm staying. Casey blinked, startled. Their staff looked between the two of them, then, one by one, nodded. For the first time, they were united. That night, Casey and Josh stayed late again, combing through financial records. The room was quiet except for the clack of keys and the occasional rustle of paper. Casey glanced up at him once and found him already watching her. What? She asked. Josh smirked faintly. You in speech mode, rallying the troops. Didn't think you had it in you. Her cheeks warmed. I know how to lead. Yeah, he said softly. You do. Something in his tone made her look away, suddenly flustered. At 11 p.m., the lights in the newsroom flickered. Casey frowned. Old building. But then a loud thunk echoed from the stairwell. Josh tensed. You locked the front door? I thought you did. They both froze. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly, heavy, deliberate. Casey's pulse hammered. She glanced at Josh, wide-eyed, tense, his jaw set. For once, no cocky grin, just alert, sharp fear. The footsteps stopped, the silence pressed heavy around them. Then, just as suddenly, nothing. Josh grabbed his bag, muttering, We're not staying here tonight. Casey didn't argue. Outside in the cool night air, they both exhaled, laughter bubbling up unbidden, shaky with nerves. Think it was maintenance? Casey asked. Or a ghost, Josh said with a crooked grin. But hey, if you're scared, I'll walk you home. Casey rolled her eyes, but she didn't say no. As they walked side by side under the street lamps, her shoulder brushing his now. And then she realized something terrifying. The danger didn't just come from outside threats. It came from him. From the way he made her feel alive, reckless, like stepping into fire. And the worst part? She wasn't sure she wanted to resist it anymore. Chapter 11. Breaking Point. The next morning, the newsroom felt colder, quieter. The cease and desist still sat on Casey's desk like a bomb waiting to go off. She ran her hand across the letter, trying to absorb its weight, when Josh dropped a coffee cup beside her. No cream, no sugar, he said. You're welcome. She blinked at him. How do you know how I take my coffee? He grinned, leaning against her desk. I pay attention. Her pulse skipped, but she looked back at her laptop before he could see it. You pay attention when it suits you. He chuckled. Touché. They spent the afternoon chasing down the custodian who had passed Josh that mysterious receipt. After 3 failed calls, he finally agreed to meet, in a parking lot on the edge of campus. The man looked more spooked than before. He shuffled nervously, eyes darting. You kids need to be careful, he muttered. This isn't small potatoes. Money's going missing. Big money. Casey leaned in. How? The custodian lowered his voice. Maintenance budgets, overbilled, fake repairs, it all funnels up but no one questions it. Too many people get a cut? Josh's eyes gleamed. Can you give us proof? The man hesitated, then scribbled an address. Old storage room. Files nobody looks at anymore, but if they find out I told you. He cut himself off, backing away. I was never here. Casey clutched the note like it was made of gold. That night, she and Josh sneaked into the archives. Dust, boxes, flickering lights. It felt like stepping into another world. Josh cracked open a file box, whistling low. Jackpot. Invoices, repair requests, all signed by the same two administrators. The numbers didn't add up. Hundreds of thousands unaccounted for. Casey's hands trembled as she flipped through the papers. This is it. This proves it. But before she could say more, a sudden clatter echoed down the hall. Casey froze. Josh grabbed her wrist, pulling her behind a stack of boxes just as a flashlight beam swept past. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might give them away. She was pressed against Josh, his breath warm against her ear. He squeezed her hand once, steadying her. The beam passed. The footsteps receded. Silence returned. Casey realized only then how close they were, chest to chest, his hand still around hers, his eyes locked on hers in the dim light. She whispered, "We should go." He whispered back, "Yeah, in a minute." Neither moved. Her stomach flipped, adrenaline and something more twisting together until she couldn't separate them. She hated that she wanted this, hated how much. And yet, when his lips brushed hers, tentative at first, she didn't pull back. The kiss deepened, urgent, messy, fueled by weeks of friction and fire. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. Just them. Then Casey broke away, breathless. This is a mistake. Josh's grin was faint, crooked, but his voice was serious. Biggest mistake of my life, maybe. Still worth it. Her chest ached with confusion, with wanting, with fear. She shoved the file box closed. We have what we came for. Let's get out. But as they slipped out of the archives into the night, Casey knew something had shifted. The story might take down the administration, but Josh Reyes was going to take her down first. Chapter 12. Lines in the Sand. The kiss lingered like static on Casey's lips the next morning, no matter how many times she told herself to forget it. She walked into the newsroom early, hoping for solitude, but Josh was already there. His feet were up on a desk, scrolling through scanned files on his laptop like nothing had changed. Casey froze in the doorway. "Don't you have your own desk?" Josh looked up, grin curling. "This one has better lighting." Her chest tightened. He wasn't going to mention it. The kiss, the way they'd nearly lost themselves in the archives. He was going to act like it hadn't happened. Fine. Two could play that game. "Did you upload the invoices?" she asked coolly. "Already encrypted. Sent backups to 2 different drives," Josh said, lowering his feet. "No one's burying this evidence now." Casey's lips twitched. She wanted to be annoyed, but damn it, he was good. By midday, news spread through campus like wildfire. The Chronicle was being suspended. The official announcement hit inboxes around 1 p.m., citing budgetary restructuring and concerns over journalistic integrity. The newsroom erupted in outrage. Students shouted, slammed fists on desks. Some cried. Casey read the email twice, bile rising in her throat. This was it. Retaliation. Josh stood in the center of the chaos, eyes blazing. They can't do this. They don't get to kill the truth because it's inconvenient. They already have, someone muttered bitterly. Casey snapped her notebook shut. Then we don't publish through them. We go independent. Heads turned, silence fell. She swallowed, pulse racing. If the Chronicle is dead, then we build something new. Online, fast, impossible to shut down. They can cut the paper, but they can't cut the truth. Josh stared at her like she'd just grown a second head. Then, slowly, he started to grin. "Look at you," he said softly. "Revolutionary Casey Hart." The staff leaned in, listening. Hope sparked, and for the first time, she saw belief reflected back at her. Not just in their eyes, but in Josh's too. The next 48 hours blurred. Casey and Josh barely left the newsroom. They set up a website, secured servers, and pulled every favor they could to get eyes on their story. Casey wrote until her fingers cramped. Josh chased leads, coaxed sources, and still somehow found time to drive her insane with his crooked grins and reckless comments. But at night, when exhaustion set in and the hum of the computers was the only sound, something heavier pressed between them. The kiss they hadn't talked about, the way her gaze lingered on him when she thought he wasn't looking. At one point, Josh caught her watching him as he scribbled notes across the whiteboard. "You gonna critique my handwriting?" he asked. "Messy," she said automatically. "Messy genius," he corrected with a wink. She shook her head, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. On the third night, close to midnight, the office door rattled. Casey jerked upright. Josh was already moving, shoving her behind a desk. The lock clicked, the door pushed open, and 2 men in suits stepped inside. University security. "Papers closed," one said flatly. "You're trespassing." Casey's breath caught. Josh stepped forward, blocking their view of her. "We're students. This is a student space." "Not anymore." The man reached for Josh's arm. Casey shot up before she could think. "We're not leaving." The security officer's eyes narrowed. "You want to risk suspension? Expulsion?" The word hit her like a slap. Expulsion, her future gone. She hesitated, but Josh's voice cut through. "Try us." He stood tall, unflinching, and something in his defiance steadied her spine. The standoff lasted seconds, but it felt like hours. Finally, the suits muttered something about escalating this and stormed out. Casey sank into a chair, shaking. "They're not bluffing, Josh. They'll ruin us." Josh crouched in front of her, hands braced on her knees. "Then let them. What's the point of keeping our futures safe if the truth dies in the dark?" Her chest ached at the intensity in his eyes. He believed it. Believed in this. In her. She whispered, "You make it sound so easy." "It's not." His voice softened. "But you're not alone in this case." Something inside her broke open. Before she could stop herself, she leaned forward, this time kissing him first. It was fiercer than the last, desperate, like both of them were clinging to something they couldn't name. When she pulled back, she was breathless. "We can't. This is complicated." Josh's grin was wry. "Everything worth it is complicated." Her laugh cracked, halfway between despair and relief. God help her, she was falling. By dawn, the story was nearly ready. Proof of fraud, corroborated testimony, scanned documents, all threaded together into a narrative that would shake the administration to its core. Casey leaned over the final draft, eyes gritty, hands trembling. "This is it." Josh stood behind her, close enough she could feel his warmth. "You ready?" "No," she admitted, "but let's do it anyway." Together, they hit publish. The screen blinked, the story went live. And Casey knew, without question, nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 13. Front page forever. The article hit like a thunderclap. By sunrise, the independent site they'd built overnight was buzzing with traffic. Thousands of hits in the first hour. Screenshots of their headline, "University Caught in Fraud Scheme, Students Uncover Hidden Trail," spread across group chats and social media. Casey refreshed the page over and over, watching the numbers climb. By mid-morning, they'd cracked 20,000 views. By noon, students were chanting outside the administration building, demanding accountability. Her inbox overflowed with emails. Some anonymous, offering tips. Some threatening. Some from professional journalists asking for interviews. And one from her advisor. Subject line, "We need to talk about your future." Casey's heart pounded. The future. It was suddenly, terrifyingly wide open. The newsroom, once quiet and hollow, was alive again. Staff members who had nearly given up days before now buzzed with energy, huddling over laptops, answering messages, forwarding leads. It felt like a rebirth. At the center of it all was Josh, pacing with a phone pressed to his ear, hair mussed, grin sharp. He looked exhausted, exhilarated, unstoppable. When he hung up, he caught Casey staring. "Local TV wants us on tonight. Liv." Her stomach flipped. "Us?" Yeah, us. You think I'm doing this solo? Please. Casey felt heat crawl up her neck. Of course he wanted to share it. Of course he'd drag her into the spotlight with him. He leaned against her desk, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Case, we did this. You and me. The words hit harder than she expected. We. The victory wasn't clean. By the second day, the university's board had announced an investigation. A couple administrators resigned for personal reasons, but the president issued a statement painting the expose as irresponsible student reporting, calling the evidence misleading. Suddenly, their little newsroom felt like a battlefield again. Half the campus believed them, half thought they'd fabricated the whole thing. Casey wanted to scream, to demand everyone see the truth laid bare in the documents. But Josh caught her pacing, chewing her nails, and stopped her with a hand on her wrist. Hey, this is what happens when you win. She stared at him. It doesn't feel like winning. He smiled, weary but sure. Give it time. Truth doesn't land all at once. It seeps, and then it sticks. Her breath caught at the certainty in his voice, at the steadiness he gave her without even realizing it. For so long, she had seen him as chaos. Now he felt like the only solid thing holding her together. The third night after publication, the staff threw a small victory party. Half pizza, half exhaustion, fully chaotic. Casey slipped out early, overwhelmed. She found herself back in the newsroom, quiet for once, the hum of computers the only sound. Josh appeared minutes later, leaning in the doorway. Knew I'd find you here. She gave him a look. You're supposed to be celebrating. So are you. He crossed the room, softer now. But here you are, avoiding it. She folded her arms, fighting the smile tugging at her lips. Maybe I like the quiet. He stopped in front of her, close enough she felt his warmth. His voice dropped. Maybe I like finding you in it. Her heart stuttered. Josh. But he cut her off with a kiss. Not rushed, not messy like before. Slow, intentional, the kind that demanded an answer. She melted before she could stop herself, hands clutching his shirt. It wasn't rivalry anymore. Wasn't desperation. It was choice. When they broke apart, breathless, she whispered, This complicates everything. Josh grinned, resting his forehead against hers. Good, I was getting bored. She laughed, shaky and real, knowing she was gone for him. Utterly, irreversibly gone. The next week was chaos. National outlets picked up the story. Alumni pressured the university. A state senator even tweeted about students holding institutions accountable. The Chronicle staff debated what came next. Could they resurrect the paper, or was it time to build something entirely new? And then came the announcement. Applications for editor-in-chief would still be accepted, despite the paper's suspension. The board wanted continuity, a path forward. Casey's chest tightened when she read the email. The position they'd both clawed toward all year. The rivalry that had defined them. It was still there, waiting. Josh found her staring at the announcement. So, he said lightly, you gonna apply? She hesitated. Aren't you? He shrugged, but his smile was faint. Not sure it matters anymore. Of course it matters, she said, sharper than intended. This is everything Josh interrupted gently. Everything we were fighting for. But after this? He gestured toward the glowing laptop screens, their stories still dominating headlines. Feels like we're already running something bigger than a title. Casey's throat tightened, because he was right. But she still wanted it. Wanted the validation, the official mark that she'd earned it. Josh studied her, then smiled that crooked smile. So maybe you take it. And I stay reckless enough to keep us moving. Her heart thudded. Us? Yeah. His gaze softened. You think I'd stop writing with you now? Casey laughed, sudden and shaky, her whole chest aching. You drive me insane. He leaned closer, murmuring, Good. I plan to keep it that way. 2 weeks later, Casey Hart was named editor-in-chief of the Chronicle. She stood in the newsroom, the title freshly hers, but when she looked around, what mattered wasn't the plaque on her desk. It was the staff buzzing with renewed fire. It was the story still echoing across campus. And it was Josh, sprawled in a chair with a grin, tossing her a coffee just the way she liked it. He winked. "So, boss, what's our next headline?" Casey caught the cup, shaking her head, smiling despite herself. "Our headline," she corrected. And for the first time, she realized the rivalry had never been the real story. The real story was what they could build together, on the page and off. Thanks for listening. Stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next story.